And remember about muting that one as soon as it gets going. Okay, you're good to go.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It is 7 p.m. on Tuesday, July 27th, and I now call to order the 2079th regular meeting of the City of College Place City Council. And will the clerk please take roll call?
Okay. Oops. Councilmember Bobbitt is not here. Councilmember Peterson,
Present.
Councilmember Selby,
Present.
Councilmember Sherman,
Present.
and Councilmember Boyle.
Present.
Okay.
Announce that Cleveland and Nyhagen requested to be excused.
Okay, and council members Cleveland and Nyhagen has requested to be excused. Also joining us tonight is our city attorney, Ree Caldwell, Administrator Mike Rizzatello, Finance Director Brian Carlton, Public Works Director Paul Hartwig, Police Chief Troy Tamaris, Community Development Director John Rickard, HR Manager Sean Doring, City Clerk Lisa Niesel, sorry, and myself, Shelley Williams, the Deputy City Clerk.
And of course, Mayor Hernandez.
And of course, Mayor Hernandez.
We do have a quorum. You're good to go.
Okay. Did we also acknowledge, I'm sorry, I didn't hear Mr. Hartwig was acknowledged, and then Mr. Withers?
Oh, and also joining us tonight is Ryan Withers from RH2.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, will you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Click go on it.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Nope, not that one.
Not that one, this one?
That one.
Okay,
Just no, close the whole thing.
okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to time for public comment. Did anyone submit a comment, or is anyone in attendance who would like to speak?
And you want to click on your participants to get that back. Hang on just one moment. We're checking.
No worries. Thank you.
No one made arrangements. Is there anyone in attendance? We do have attendees. Is there anyone in attendance that would like to speak? Raise your hand. No one is wanting to speak.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so we will be moving on. And Shelley, if I'm moving too fast, please let me know. Okay, we're going to move on to the consent agenda, which includes approving the agenda for today, July 27th, 2021, approving the council minutes from July 13th, 2021, the check register and financials for June 2021, and also excusing the absence of council members Cleveland and Nyhagen. Are there any items the council would like removed from the consent agenda at this time?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Wonderful, thank you. Is there a second?
Councilmember Boyle, I'll second.
Great. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. The motion is passed. Okay, moving on to item number 4, which are our presentations. And we have a presentation tonight from Chief Tamaris on the police legislative changes that went into effect. Chief Tamaris, the floor is yours.
Okay, so let me see here, share my screen.
Share. So you can stop sharing.
All right. So before I begin, many of you have read the letter signed by myself, Chief Beaver from Walla Walla Police Department, and Sheriff Crider in regards to how the new legal reforms will change how law enforcement traditionally responds to our citizens' calls for service. I want to say this is not what we want, but rather what we are forced to uphold under the new laws. The new laws disrupt our ability to be proactive or respond to many of our traditional police calls. We're now focusing on how to transition our traditional police calls to non-traditional organizations such as crisis workers, the fire department, and social services. All who have historically responded to calls, or we've responded to these calls with, in partnership to resolve critical incidents in our community. I'm going to highlight some of these new laws, but want to first try and explain why we have lost so much authority under these new laws. So a big component is centered, before we begin here, a big component is centered on our reduced ability to act under reasonable suspicion. And at any time, if I misspeak, or if you can clarify something better with legal speak or legalese, please do so.
Absolutely.
So reasonable suspicion is a core standard of proof used by police when conducting investigations. It's reasonable suspicion comprises of facts and circumstances that are objectively reasonable that a crime may have been committed. Reasonable suspicion has been upheld by U.S. Supreme Court, which provides officers the legal standard and authority to investigate crimes in our community and across our country. Officers under reasonable suspicion may detain individuals long enough to confirm or dispel criminal activity. These investigations may lead to probable cause for arrest or exonerate the individual. Previously, officers could use justifiable and reasonable force under this standard. Under the new law, force can only be used after probable cause has been established. Probable cause is a higher standard of proof, which is greater than suspicion. Probable cause is a measurement of facts that indicate a crime has been committed. Under the new reform bills, officers may not detain or be in a position to use force unless they have probable cause. This is why we can only respond to criminal acts that have already occurred or met a higher standard of proof that a crime has been committed. So I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of context as we move into this presentation. If you have any questions before we begin? Okay, so the first reform bill is House Bill 1054, titled Tactics. Now, I'm not going to hit every highlight of these. Please take the time to review this in more detail. And at any time, if you have questions, call me or come see me. But I'm going to hit the highlights just for time. We went over this with our officers in training. It took 4 hours. So we're not going to do that to you tonight, I promise. But it's important to hit the highlights. So House Bill 1054 prohibits the use of chokehold or neck restraints. Now, we haven't used chokeholds in our state for a long, long time. We haven't used it in College Place Police Department for many, many years. It is a lethal force option. Neck restraint we did use under the vascular neck restraint, which I briefed counsel on before. That is vascular, that is blood pressure, that is your blood, not your air. So, but that is now off the table. We cannot use tear gas unless under certain exceptions. And one of them, which is we must have the highest authorization from an elected official, which would be the mayor. And prohibits law enforcement from using or acquiring military equipment, which we do not have at the College Place Police Department. But one of the big components of this bill says you cannot use weapons with 50 caliber or higher. Now, whether that's the intent was we are assuming rifles, which we do not have or possess. But what this does as one of the unintentional consequences is it removes our less lethal shotguns, which shoots a beanbag propellant or projectile. It also removes our 40 millimeter less lethal, which shoots a foam projectile. These are both tools that I've seen utilized in our community effectively and have saved lives. Without these, we are left with only a rifle or pistol from a distance. We no longer have that less lethal option from a distance. 1054 also reduces pursuits, essentially eliminates pursuits. There are certain conditions when you can pursue, and that is if you have probable cause, that higher standard that a vehicle has committed or is committing a violent offense, such as homicide or rape or escape. But you can have a reduced level under reasonable suspicion if you believe the person is driving under the influence, which would be not ideal to be in a pursuit with. It goes on and lists other reasons that must be met, but a big one for agencies that have 10 or more officers, which would include College Place, the pursuing officer must have supervisory approval, and a supervisor must be working and have supervisory control of the pursuit. It also prohibits officers from firing a weapon at a moving vehicle with one narrowly tailored exception, and that example that was provided to us in training was a situation where perhaps an officer is in an alleyway and the officer has no means of escape. And at that time, the officer would be justified in shooting at the driver of the vehicle. We have trained for years, and we train at the College Place Police Department, that firing a weapon at a vehicle is rarely effective and should not be used unless under narrowly tailored exceptions. And we were trained to that standard already. House Bill 1089 discusses or changes audits of independent investigations. This authorizes the state auditor to conduct, in cooperation with the Criminal Justice Training Center, that's CJTC, a process compliance audit of any deadly force investigation. It authorizes state auditor, when requested by the CJTC, to conduct an audit of any law enforcement agency to ensure they are in compliance with the laws, policies, and procedures. House Bill 1223, which is the Uniform Electronic Recordation of Custodial Interrogations. I need to move this real quick out of my way. Requires that any custodial interrogation, express questioning, or other actions or words by a law enforcement officer which are reasonably likely to elicit an incriminating response from an individual and occurs when reasonable individuals in the same circumstance would consider themselves in custody of an adult for a felony offense or a juvenile of any offense be electronically recorded. Now, I'm told the background behind this is to promote agencies to get body cameras. As you know, you have funded us with the body cameras. We've deployed body cameras for going on 4 months now, very successfully. We are in good position to make this transition pretty seamless. If a custodial interrogation takes place at a jail or police or sheriff station or holding cell, the recording must be done with audio and video. And if you are in custodial interrogation of any other location, it must be audio at a minimum. We're in a position where we can do both, whether we are out on the street at the scene of a crime, or if we are in a facility, we can do both. So we're in good position to do that. I'm going to move on here for time. This leads into House Bill 1140, which is juvenile access to attorneys. A juvenile cannot waive the right to an attorney. It requires that a law enforcement officer provide a juvenile under the age of 18 with access to an attorney for consultation prior to a juvenile waiving any constitutional rights. If the officer is questioning a juvenile during a custodial interrogation, detains a juvenile based on probable cause of involvement in criminal activity, or requests that a juvenile consent to an evidentiary search of their person, property, dwelling, or vehicle. The law specifically prohibits a juvenile from waiving their right to be provided access to an attorney. There are some narrow exceptions if you are out under an investigation and you do not have cell phone signal, you would then have to document in your report the attempts of that. We have provided all of our officers cards that give them phone numbers to public defenders so that we can meet the requirements of this new bill. I just want to note that this makes it incredibly difficult to interview any juveniles that might be involved in a crime. So basically renders us unable to do or conduct any interviews with juveniles. Senate Bill 5051 is decertification of officers. This grants the Criminal Justice Training Center to decertify law enforcement officers. This can be done independent of an employing agency. So if an internal investigation is completed by the employing agency, the Criminal Justice Training Center can overturn that opinion and decertify the officer. It also requires law enforcement to report within 15 days upon learning of any occurrence of any death or serious injury caused by the use of force by an officer, or at any time an officer has been charged with a crime, and an initial disciplinary decision for alleged behavior or conduct by an officer that is non-criminal and may result in revocation of certification. It requires law enforcement to conduct a complete disciplinary investigation into alleged misconduct, even if the officer resigns or retires. So there are cases where during an investigation, a civil investigation, an officer decides to retire or resign, and some agencies have stopped their investigation. This law now requires organizations to complete the investigation and report the findings to the Criminal Justice Training Center. That will be on record so that the officer may not get hired elsewhere in the state, or if another state agency requests the information, it'll be provided to them. It also prohibits law enforcement from entering into an agreement or contract with an officer or union to not report the conduct or delay reporting, agree not to report if the officer retires or resigns, and that allows the agency to destroy or remove any personnel records while the officer is employed for 10 years after. Any findings have to be held in their permanent records for up to 10 years after retirement. It also authorizes the Criminal Justice Training Center to impose civil penalties to the organization for failing to report timely information to the Criminal Justice Training Center. Now, this is the State versus Blake. You've heard testimony on this when we were making the ordinance to uphold simple possession. And some of the functions of this bill require the health authority to establish a statewide substance use recovery services plan. Walla Walla County has a recovery service plan. I'm going to get into just some of the simple facts here. Amends the Uniform Controlled Substance Act to specify knowingly instead of unknowingly in possession of controlled substance. It drops it from a felony to a simple misdemeanor. These provisions are good for 2 years and will expire July 1st, 2023. And at that time, the legislators will take a second look at the bill. There's a big part of this, a big component of this, however, that unless a law enforcement agency records, records reflect that a person has been diverted to 2 referrals, you cannot arrest. So they have to have at least 2 prior referrals of prior crimes before you can physically arrest and charge with possession of a controlled substance. That's just one piece of it. We met here a couple weeks ago with our city attorney, prosecutor Ree, along with the county and city of Walla Walla prosecutors and attorneys. There's a bigger component to this. It's really any misdemeanor or gross misdemeanor. They have to have 2 prior contacts with referrals before you can physically arrest. Now, this is for people who are chemically dependent or experiencing mental health issues only. So if they have a mental health component or a chemical dependency component, we cannot arrest. We have to have 2 prior referrals before you can physically arrest. This is the difficult part. We currently do not have a statewide tracking system. So if you are in Bremerton and you commit you have 2 prior referrals for possession of heroin, and then they decide to come to College Place, Walla Walla area and get that third arrest or third contact with a possession of heroin, we have no idea they've had 2 prior referrals. So it's difficult to make that third arrest. We are working diligently with the other agencies to come up with a tracking system to help us locally. And I do know that the state is trying to come up with a system that will track it at the state level through sector, which is a very cumbersome system, but at least it's something they're trying to put into place. This actually went into effect July 1st. So people who have had those referrals prior to July 1st or from July 1st on may have that first referral.
And Troy, can I jump in?
Yes, please.
So what this means, I think, the biggest impact we'll have on College Place is, I mean, I think we can all agree that referring for services is a good thing. But this Walmart thefts, if we have a person who has stolen something from Walmart, and it's under $750, which makes it a misdemeanor, and they need to, I mean, I think we can all say that we either all have a substance abuse or mental health issues, and particularly our marginalized community, that affects their behavior. But we won't be able to charge those individuals. And so that will just be a loss of there will be no restitution payments for those 2 cases. So, and that's just going to be a write-off. So that's I assume an unintended consequence of this, but that's something that will affect Walmart. I've spoken with them, they're aware what's going on, and they're kind of just resigned to that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, no, please jump in at any time. I really appreciate your help. Consequently, the individual who is just stealing something because they want it selfishly, but do not have a component of chemical dependency or mental health, it seems like it is not another system that is not maybe fair across the board. So I'll leave it at that. It also modifies the drug paraphernalia statute to remove reference to paraphernalia used to test, analyze, pack, repack, store, contain, conceal, inject, ingest, inhale, or otherwise introduce controlled substances into the human body. All right, House Bill 1088 is the potential impeachment disclosures. It requires each county prosecutor in consultation with agencies representing law enforcement officers and local departments to develop and adopt written protocol no later than July 1st, 2022. This is already in place. The prosecutor has this, that we've been doing this for a while. It's just now with this new law that has to be updated every 2 years. So they're working on updating it.
Chief, this is Lauren. Could you go back one slide?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Which one?
Well, modifies the drug paraphernalia statute to remove reference. Is that new?
It is. We could charge, previously you could charge someone with the with drug paraphernalia. So if they have if they're smoking crack and they have that crack pipe and there's residue where the crack pipe has been used, that could be used as a component or element of the crime.
And that's off the table. Okay, thanks.
That's now off the table. Anything to add to that, Ree?
Nope. I will add that we rarely had drug paraphernalia use charges, maybe 2 or 3 a year, and usually along with other charges.
Okay, this is House Bill 1267. This is the Office of Independent Investigations. This is going to be this creates an Office of Independent Investigations within the Office of the Governor and designates the agency as a limited authority Washington law enforcement agency. So this will be a law enforcement agency working directly under the governor's office. It will go into effect July 1st, 2022. They are going to be funded this year, and they will start working on putting their organization together. They will be in charge of investigating on duty or off duty officer involved shootings. They will have the ability to, and a lot of this we don't know. So from what I understand is they will have the ability to take over an investigation. Now we currently have a statewide system set up where we have independent investigations. So if College Place is involved in an officer involved shooting, we would not investigate it. This would be done by an independent investigation team. We are members of the SIU, Special Investigative Unit. And so it's comprised of members from every agency out of Tri-Cities and the Walla Walla County area. We have detectives that are on that team. It has oversight, civilian oversight. And a lot of those changes were reformed last session to add additional oversight. We don't know if they will continue to do investigations because they are subject matter experts with a lot of years of experience in conducting these investigations, or if there will be parallel investigations with this new independent investigation team. We just don't know what this is going to look like yet. So there's going to be more to come on that. But it does create this new branch of government, which will be an investigative branch, and they will work closely with the auditors, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out because we just don't know enough about it and what it's going to look like. So this is the big one here. This is the new House Bill 1310, use of force. It repeals the previous 1031-050. Authorizes a law enforcement officer to use physical force when necessary to protect against criminal conduct where there is probable cause, that's the big change, to make an arrest, effect an arrest, or prevent an escape as defined by RCW 9A76, or protect against an imminent threat of bodily injury to the law enforcement officer, another person, or the person against whom force is being used. It authorizes a law enforcement officer to use deadly force only when necessary under the totality of the circumstances. A reasonably effective alternative to the use of deadly force does not exist, and that the amount of force used was a reasonable and proportional response to the threat posed to the officer and others. It creates a duty of reasonable care for all Washington law enforcement officers. And this standard here under the reasonable care standard is also highlighted within our de-escalation I-940 training, which I've already been through and half of our officers have been through. And that was a requirement that went into effect last year, and they gave us a year to get through the training. So the rest of our officers will be trained over the next couple months. Now, the duty of reasonable care language, I believe is put in there to make it easier for people to sue cities, counties, and officers for negligence. But the standards that are listed there that we are now going to subject our reasonableness to are the following. It requires, when possible, that an officer exhaust available and appropriate de-escalation tactics prior to using any physical force, such as time, distance, and cover, calling for additional resources, including backup officers and/or crisis intervention teams or mental health professionals, designating one officer to communicate with the subject, taking, that's that contact cover philosophy, taking as much time as necessary without using physical force or weapons, and leaving the area if there is no threat of imminent harm and no crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. So those are the standards in which we will be judging officers' actions under this new probable cause. When using physical force, use the least amount of physical force necessary to overcome resistance under the circumstances and consideration of characteristics. These have not changed. Those are consistent with our policy and training that have been in place. Terminate the use of force as soon as necessary for such force ends. When possible, use available and appropriate less lethal alternatives before using deadly force, and make less lethal alternatives issued to the officer reasonably available for their use. Now, one thing I want to note here, that's in the law. However, they did take VNR from us, vascular neck restraint, which was a less lethal option. And we lost our ability to use our less lethal tools, such as the beanbag shotgun and the foam baton and 40 millimeter. So we have had all three of those options removed from us, but yet that is a standard in which we are going to be judged to do our job.
Chief Lamar, what does that leave you with?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, excuse me, the interruption. So what does that leave our officers with?
We have tasers, and tasers are a close proximity tool that accuracy wise I would say probably 50%. So it's effective between 7 and 14 feet.
And otherwise it's going to be a bullet.
The other options we have are our weapons. Yes. Or personal weapons if we were to fight someone, try to gain control of someone. However, if they have, well, I'll tell you what, was it June 6, 2017 incident when the Sager Middle School principal was attacked by those two students. One of them had a metal spear. While Walla officers showed up with the less lethal shotgun from 30 yards away, was able to deploy 2 rounds with the beanbag, introducing pain compliance. The young man he dropped the metal spear and took off running. So that was a big win for us. If we did not have that shotgun to separate him from that weapon, it would have been lethal force. So we've essentially eliminated our officer's ability to save that kid's life if that law was if that situation happened today.
So, Chief, this is Lauren, and maybe for Ree also. This is, and I'm sorry, there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions at the end here, but
yeah.
From our little town here, is there a sense that from what you're hearing from others that there will be cleanup on this policy or policies? And the reason why I'm wondering, back to your point of 50 caliber, is that possibly that was missed because of the diameter of that, and that will be cleaned up in the future, or was that intentional?
That's our hopes. In fact, I'd heard rumors of the senator who sponsored that bill has come out and said that was not his intent. So I'm hopeful that will be changed, but the words are the words right now, and that's how.
Sure. Yeah.
That's our hopes. I will share with the council. I did meet with our local representatives this morning, along with the sheriff and other law enforcement leaders from Walla Walla Police Department and the undersheriff. And we met with Mark Clicker, Skylar Rood, and Mr. Perry Dozier this morning, and we discussed how some of these bills came about. And we discussed some of the intent behind some of these bills, and then what can we do to address some of these bills that I believe personally are an overreach in an attempt to gain reform in our state. And I personally believe that it's gone beyond what most people in our community have expected or would expect for these reforms. And it's essentially is depolice the police. We do not have the ability to respond to most traditional law enforcement calls that we have been able to in the past, which is going to put us in a more dangerous environment for our officers and also for our community members. I'll keep working through this. I think we're just about done.
And I'll just pipe in here. I looked at the laws, but I think to say I'm super smart, I didn't want to be the person that interpreted them one particular way. And so I reached out to other attorneys, other prosecutors, and you've probably seen in the news, it's this how the chief is approaching this with our law enforcement officers is consistent throughout the state, whether it's a Republican prosecutor or a Democratic prosecutor, east or west side, everyone's interpreting pretty much the same way.
We've had meetings, and Rhea's been fantastic, and she is very smart, and she's provided great guidance to our officers in our city on how to move forward with this. We have also, and Ree and I together have attended a webinar with WASPIC. I've attended multiple webinars. We've met with area legal officials, city attorneys, prosecutors. And as she said, we are consistent in following recommendation. The one frustration that we've had is we have had zero response from the Attorney General's office. We haven't received any opinions from the Attorney General on any of these reforms. So we're hoping, now I've told my officers, now some of these laws are very restrictive, and some of them, as we learn more, may become more restrictive, but hopefully they become less restrictive so that we can better serve our community. But until then, we are moving forward consistently as a law enforcement group to ensure that our officers are protected, because if you look back at these slides, if an officer makes a mistake or uses force under the reasonable suspicion standard, they can be decertified and prosecuted. So we have to really walk that line very carefully as we're learning this. And some of these bills are 300 pages long. A lot of legal jargon, in not for the faint of heart, because they are difficult to read. So yes. Consequences. As a result, welfare checks. We generally will not respond to welfare checks. A supervisor may give approval after determining there's no other alternatives. Involuntary Treatment Act, which a dedicated crisis responder or DCR must have completed an evaluation and signed an apprehension form prior to our response. Traditionally, we've responded with a crisis worker for safety, and we would help control that individual if necessary while they do their evaluations, or take them into protective custody to get them to a medical facility to do the evaluation. That we can no longer do that under the new higher standard. If a dedicated crisis responder signs the apprehension form, that basically gives us probable cause at that point to take the person into protective custody, but without it, we cannot respond. And an ITA requirement is, or Involuntary Treatment Act is, they are a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or they are gravely disabled. Those are the standards. Even with a signed evaluation, the officer is trained to second guess those. I wouldn't say second guess them, but reassure themselves that they do meet those standards, if you will. Mental health calls. Generally, we will not be responding to these calls. This is going to shift to either the fire department or a crisis worker. Now, if there is a crime component, then we could respond, and a supervisor will help make those decisions. Civil calls generally will not respond, may have a scenario where a crime has occurred again, and the supervisor will determine. This does not include protection orders. And a suspicious person call. These will generally be drive-bys. We'll just drive by the area, we'll shine a light on someone and ask people to, will be a visual deterrent. We have lost our ability to detain because detainment is a function of a reasonable suspicion. Now, let me give you an example of what that looks like. This is traditionally how we've responded to calls. You get a call of a domestic violence that is occurring at a residence. The officer shows up. As he is showing up, a gentleman is walking out of the front door. The officer says to the individual, "Sir, we received a call. Is there something happening in this house? Is everybody okay?" "Yes, yeah, everything's fine. My wife and I are just having an argument. I'm leaving." Traditionally, we would detain that individual long enough to confirm or dispel that a crime has not been committed. We would check on the individual's wife or significant other, whoever's living in that house, and determine that a crime is not committed, making sure that individual is safe, not injured. Under this new law, an individual we cannot touch them. They can just walk or even obstruct our ability to get into the house and check on the victim. So this is a significant shift in how we would respond to a domestic violence call, which is the most dangerous and lethal encounter for municipal law enforcement and county law enforcement. So it's a big shift in how, and more people are going to get hurt. It's unfortunate. I have other examples that we can talk about. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. Here's some references that I used. I do want to say one thing though, and I think it's important to thank, I want to thank the mayor. She has been incredibly supportive from the time that I first briefed her on how we were going to move forward. She has asked, what can I do to support the officers? She has reached out to other representatives around the state to elicit some change and maybe make some of these amendments a little bit more towards the center that are reasonable. And Mayor, I just want to thank you for that. You've been very supportive and greatly appreciate it, because this has been my 30-year career. This has been the most difficult 2 weeks of my 30-year career, and I really appreciate your support. It goes a long ways. So,
Of course, thank you. Thank you, Chief Tamaras. It is truly with you and your officers. I am concerned about the morale of our officers. So I would ask that HR and yourself keep a check on that. You know, pressure check, see what their mental health status is, and you know, what they're feeling. The last thing I want them to do is feel so demoralized that they feel that the career they have chosen is not respected or not necessary. And, you know, you're talking about this domestic violence, and as a person who grew up in a household of domestic violence and who had to call 911 many times, hiding behind a door, it terrifies me. It just horrifies me to think that some child or woman is going to experience that and not have an officer be able to walk in that door to check on them. It pains me truly, personally.
another quick example, last night, if you haven't heard, the city of Walla Walla responded to a shooting. 2 individuals were shot. I'm unclear if it was gang activity or drug activity. I believe that is what was involved. Ongoing investigation, of course, so I do not know the facts. But nonetheless, they were shot. The Walla Walla officers responding are pausing, because normally you would respond, and if as you approach people, you would take people into protective custody, you would detain them while you're conducting your investigation, because you may have victims, you may have suspects, you may have witnesses that can add to the investigation and lead to probable cause to effect an arrest. And the pause is my fear, that people are going to pause and criminals are going to walk free, and or officers, because of that pause, are going to get hurt. And this is not acceptable. I do not want my officers hurt. I do not want people in my community hurt as a result of these decisions. It's unacceptable. And I really believe that the majority of our community is unaware of the ramifications of these potentially unintended consequences, but nonetheless, there's a lot of consequences that are a result of these legal reforms that just seemed a little bit of an overreach. And I just think we need to make some changes.
And I'd like the council to know that on over the weekend, emails were sent, but as of Monday, City Attorney Colwell was helping work, write a press release for me, and Chief Tamaras and City Attorney Colwell and myself kind of reviewed that and went over it. And that press release regarding my support for the police department and my disagreement with the way the laws are written or the way the reform have been released today. So if you all have not had a chance to see that, it's been released on social media sites, on the various social media sites. Or if you don't have a social media site, I'm sure one of us can forward it to you. And Chief Tamaras, I believe I speak on behalf of the whole city council. Please let your officers know and yourself know that if there's anything that we could do or we could help, please just do not hesitate to let us know. And please let your team know that they have our full support. And to please be safe. We understand the stress they're working under.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm going to go through council members to, I'm sure that's there's more words of support for you. So we will start with Council Member Peterson.
Yeah, there's a lot to digest here. It's going to take a while. You know, I think this is one of the fears that many of us had It's the transition from getting from maybe perhaps less police involvement to a more robust mental health response, fire response, whatever it is. And to me, this was like a light switch, perhaps. In other words, the domestic disturbance. Well, if the city had a fully staffed social work, a process, we don't have that right now. And so, do we start arming the firemen? I mean, this is, I mean, it's happened a little bit too fast here, I think, for us to react to it, quite frankly. I guess the one question I have is a probable cause and reasonable suspicion is interesting, because I understand you've got an outside agency that could come back and second guess everything that happened. But Chief, is that with the support of the city, and I mean our attorney and our other resources, we are able to come to the defense of officers where there is something that is on that, I'll call it the thin red line on the left or right side of that? It's not black and white, correct?
It is a moving, if you want, Chief, I can answer that. It is a bit of a moving target between, the call comes in, the observation made, the reasonable suspicion, the ability to detain someone, and then getting to probable cause. And while law enforcement already still has the ability to request someone to stay or to detain someone, and then if that person isn't compliant, arguably the officer would have probable cause for obstruction. But I think that is problematic in people coming back and second guessing and saying, you just detained them so you could get PC for obstruction, and you're really just not fulfilling the intent of the law. But the problem is written in the statute is mandatory decertification if a court of law finds that you have violated any of the statutes. So it's basically up to one trial judge to second guess a law enforcement officer and say you didn't comply with the statute, and it's mandatory decertification. And we talked about, is it worth the risk of financial liability to the city to save someone's life or not shoot someone? Yes. Is it worth taking away a law enforcement officer's livelihood through decertification? No. And that's, something that we're going to continue to evaluate, the risk versus the benefit, and continue to evaluate as cases come before courts and lawsuits happen and things like that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, thank you. That does, because how robust, can the city defend an action of an officer? You're talking, I understand that, and I fully believe that some of these things are going to be worked out. We're talking about College Place. Imagine, South Seattle right now tonight. What's going on? So I'm sure there will be some high level discussions that we'll find out about. So thank you so much.
But, and I'm sure none of us would disagree that there is need for police reform and for reasonable standards, but this was not the way to go about it. Okay.
And let me be clear, I am open to thoughtful reform. Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. Councilwoman Selby.
I have a comment and a couple of questions. One of my comments is I really support the idea of having additional resources like mental health, etc. But it's frightening to think of them going out without police backup. And I think where we've gone wrong, if you will, is not having those resources, and the police have to be the front line rather than the backup. So just that's kind of my comment. But one question that I did have is code enforcement. What happens with that? Because it sounds like maybe, I don't think any of our like leaving trash around is a crime, I don't think. So
Yeah, the majority. Well, first, let me address the response with comprehensive health, and it was a very hard conversation to have with comprehensive health when I had to outline our response and how things were going to change. That was quite devastating for them to hear because we have a great partnership. And you look at successful response programs around the country, it's in partnership with law enforcement and medical staff and crisis workers. And we had a good thing going, and we were making an impact in our community in saving lives. We gave confidence to a dedicated crisis responder to be able to go into a situation where they normally would not. And I've had to tell them that when you get these calls here in the future, as we shift this responsibility to solely you, that you may have to make a determination that you're just not going to go because it's not safe for you. And sadly, that's going to could potentially have a cause of loss of life as a suicide or whatever it may be. Yeah, so I hope that it addresses that concern.
but I still have a question about code enforcement. Like
Oh yeah, yeah. So code enforcement is those are civil, and our code enforcement officer is not a fully commissioned officer. Doesn't have the same standards as a police officer would. That would definitely, we officers have the ability to do code enforcement, but now we will not be doing that at all. We'll rely solely on our code enforcement officer. Now, could there be criminal charges from code enforcement? There could, but it takes a long time to get to that level.
Okay, thank you. My other question was, I have been impressed with the partnership, but I have to admit, I don't know how the mental health crisis hotline or whatever is funded. So this may be a question more for the mayor or someone else. Are we going to need to find more money for that?
It's woefully funded.
Surprise me.
And not just that, there's a shortage of professional mental health care workers. There's just not enough for even what we've been doing, much less with these reforms.
And the
more difficult for them.
The LEADS program was specially funded, and we're one of 3 places in the state that has received money. And we probably filled all the slots in 45 days to where, we can't bring anyone else in unless someone graduates or is discharged. And the bill appropriates $2.5 million to combat drug use, which is,
oh my goodness,
is just pennies. It's not going to do anything. And the counties are the ones that are charged really with providing those services, and we know their funding is minimal.
Yeah, all of this sounds like a very high priority for our AWC legislative priorities, I guess is the word I'm looking for next year.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Councilwoman Sherman.
Thank you for your presentation, Troy. That was eye-opening and really infuriating. How can we help? Other than thanking police officers for their service and just being here and being willing to listen. Are there things that we can do other than sitting here frustrated?
Yeah, well, I do believe that if we reach out to the governor's office and our local representatives, that we can maybe agree to have some thoughtful reform that meets the needs of concerned citizens while still protecting our officers and giving them the ability to do their jobs to also meet the needs of our citizens. I think there has to be somewhere in between. So I think we just need to reach out and let people know, because like I said, I believe the overwhelming majority of people have no idea what's happening here. And that would be very helpful.
Okay.
People who are watching tonight, or you, if people could reach out to their representatives.
I'll reach out to my representative again, see if he responds this time. But thank you. I mean, Yeah, I know that we have no idea what you guys see every single day. And you know that our council has always been supportive of our law enforcement, and I hope that you still feel that even more today and yeah, in the foreseeable future.
Well, we are grateful for our council, and we have mentioned in meetings that it's a good time to be working in the city of College Place while all of this is happening, because we do have the support of our mayor and our council. And we discussed that in our meeting the other day. And we're going to do everything we can to move forward with positive attitudes, because we do care about serving our community. We just have some limitations now, what we can respond to, and we're going to work through that.
And really good officers, not one that I have a shred of worry about.
They're pretty great.
Good people.
Yeah. Thanks, Troy.
You know, I think another thing that we could do is the perception out there by a lot of people from what I'm seeing on social media, and they think this is just about crisis care and the response to police not being able to, or not going to crisis calls. It's a bigger picture than that. And I think that's where the lack of understanding, it's not that anybody's opposed to crisis care workers stepping up and helping those that are having mental health crisis. It's about the limitations on our police outside of that. So one thing we can help with is if people bring it up or question, you know, talk to them about that it's not in opposition of mental health care or having the mental health care workers there. It's completely outside of that. Okay, Councilwoman Boyle.
First, I'm going to echo some of the sentiments of my other council people. We are so grateful for everything that you have done through this whole process. I know that this has been a painstaking few weeks for you guys, and trying to, you know, you guys taking the time to fully comprehend and try to interpret what is expected of you guys moving forward. So thank you for that dedication and time. My question is, you know, historically through like corrections and law enforcement, the pendulum is always kind of, it likes to do extremes, right? So we're clearly swinging to another extreme for a while. So my question is trying to get some form of perspective on some of these things. Is there some sort of explanation why they've taken those less than lethal options away? I mean, to me, those feel like such a common sense option to actually encourage and add to, that to have those taken away, I just don't understand the thinking behind it. Is there any reference you can give me there?
Well, the bills actually contradict each other. On the use of force bill, it requires us to utilize those tools, but then the military equipment bill removes those. And I believe those are unintended consequences that were not thought out. I'm hopeful that whether it's a special session or whatever they need to do to go in there and change that language to make those readily available to our officers so that we can protect people's lives. So that's a great question, a great observation.
Okay. Thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thank you, ma'am.
They just rushed through it way too fast because they wanted to get it approved, and it's been a very, I don't know, poor mistake on their part for sure. Okay, are there any other comments or questions before we close this? Councilmember Selby?
Thank you. I do want to agree with what people have said about the great work that our police department does and how much we appreciate them. I would point out that one of the reasons I think why the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth is the more other services get cut, the more the police have had to step in. And so now people are going, well, why are the police doing that? So it's not entirely, but a huge chunk of this comes back to properly funding the services that we need in our counties. And so I just think that needs to be part of our message. over and over again.
And that reminds me of a very important fact, and that is, so that you're aware, with this defund the police movement, that Washington State is actually dead last in officers per capita in our country. We're actually 51 out of 50. We're actually below DC. So DOJ recommends 2.4 officers for every 1,000 residents. We are well under that. In College Place, we're 1 per capita per 1,000, as you know. So Washington State is already defunded. We are the lowest amount of police officers in the country in our state.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Damaris. I know it's been a very long few weeks for you. And so this was well put together. We appreciate it. And on a personal basis, my prayers are with you and our officers for strength and safety.
Grateful. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a hard one. Let's move on. We have no public hearings tonight, so we're going to move on to action items. And the first action item is the water use efficiency goals adoption by Mr. Hartwig and Mr. Withers of RH2.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Department of Health set a standard that called the water use efficiency. And part of that is that we have to set goals for conserving and using water wisely. And that is required every 6 years. Usually it is done with an update of a water system plan. And so as part of our plan that we're in the process of and have submitted to Department of Health for review, we have done a water use efficiency. We've held a public meeting and there was really no comments there. And so now we're bringing it to council. And we got Ryan Withers here, who has been the lead on the water system plan. And so I'll let him take over and give a summary of what we have.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And again, I'm Ryan Withers with RH2 Engineering, assisting Paul and his staff with the preparation of your water system plan, and within that, your water use efficiency program and its goals. So I'll take a few minutes now to summarize this program, the updates within this year's program, and then field any questions that you have. So as Paul alluded to, the Washington State Department of Health requires periodic updates of your water use efficiency program and goals. One of the main requirements includes developing goals and updating them on a city by city or water system by water system basis every 10 years. It was previously every 6 years. That's been updated. It's now every 10 years. So like I said, I'm assisting Paul and his staff with this update that should get you through the year 2031. And water conservation is important. And, it kind of benefits everybody, right? It benefits customers with lower water bills. And, it reduces the reduction that your aquifer levels experience, that your city wells are completed within, which will then prolong the life of your existing and future sources and push out the need for, additional sources, in the very near future here. So the water use efficiency program in front of you that we are asking for approval tonight, pending your comments, includes 2 goals. The first being to maintain your water system's distribution system leakage on a 3-year rolling average basis at 5% or less. Now, I'll add a little context here. The state has a threshold of 10% leakage or less before you have to do any action above and beyond this program, that is. And historically, the city's been in the 4% range, 5% range. So you're at approximately half the leakage of a lot of your peers and of any actionable levels. So on the whole, you're in a really good spot. And then the second goal in this water use efficiency program is to reduce your average daily demand on a per capita basis by 3% over the next 20 years. So year 2040. That goal is consistent with the past water use efficiency program. And as a city, you were able to achieve already a 3% reduction in demand per capita in 6 years, as opposed to the 20-year planning period that was being considered previously. But obviously, as you continue to reduce your demand per capita, you're going to start to reach diminished returns, which is why we don't want to be too aggressive with updating this goal with something, a little more aggressive. And then in addition to those two goals, the city also has a requirement to submit annual performance reports to the Department of Health each summer. Those are relatively quick reports that the Public Works Department puts together and submits to Health each year. As Paul mentioned, the city staff conducted a public hearing in June to request consumer and general public comment regarding the proposed water use efficiency program, the goals contained within, and allowed the public multiple weeks to review the program, to ask questions of Mr. Hartwig, myself, or others. No comments were received during the public comment period. So we have not made any edits or updates since June. And now, pending any council member comments or questions, we are requesting action tonight on the resolution in front of you. But before we even get to that point, are there questions that I can answer?
All right, I'm going to go through council members to give everybody an opportunity to see if you have any questions or comments for Mr. Withers. Let's go ahead and start with Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah, I've got a couple here. Real quickly, is a 3% well, let's just pick 3% as a starting amount. Is a 3% net of city growth?
It's on a per capita basis, so it does consider growth. Yes.
So okay, so right. So a 10% growth, it could be more than 3%. One of the other questions, and I have this discussion sometimes with individuals in our community, if in theory, if a company had a very successful reduction in water usage, we would have to go back to the drawing board and recalibrate what we're charging per gallon. I heard you make the comment of a lower water bill, but that is interesting. We all want that, but the issue, I guess, would be you conserve water for the correct reason. I don't think it would be perhaps not a moral reason, but it's the thing to do to save our planet. But do you agree you'd have to go back and recalibrate your fees to pay for the revenue bonds and the operating costs of your existing structure?
Yes, that you're absolutely correct. It is a bit of I'll say tug of war between those two aspects. On one hand, you're absolutely right, Mr. Council Member, but and then on the other hand, devil's advocate, it does offset the need for millions of dollars of additional source improvements. And so it kind of, it goes both ways, and oftentimes it comes in waves where as I'm sure you're all well aware, constructing some new sources now or recently, and then, you'll hit some thresholds and be okay for a decade, 15 years, maybe, depending on growth. And then, at some point we'll need another source. And so it does come in waves. But you're absolutely correct. Cities that do see major reductions, I'm talking cities, clients that we work with that go from 20% leakage levels down to 10% or less, depending on where that leakage is. Also, is it on the customer side of I'll say wasteful water use, or is it on the supply side or the distribution side of aging water main that's failing and leaking? You're not receiving any revenue on that money. It's just infiltrating back into the ground. So it is city by city specific, but you are absolutely correct. It can be a double-edged sword here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councilwoman Selby.
No questions.
Councilwoman Sherman?
I don't have any questions either, but definitely what Lauren was talking about with the fine line between usage and what our fixed costs are is pretty tight. So yeah, it's an interesting conversation for sure. Thank you for your information.
Welcome.
Okay. And Councilwoman Boyle?
No questions. Thank you.
All right. If there aren't any other questions or comments, do we have a motion on this resolution?
Madam Chair, I would move to approve resolution number 21-035, adopting the water use efficiency goals.
Thank
Councilmember
you.
Peterson, second.
Wonderful. Any additional discussions? All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is passed.
Mayor,
Yes,
could I
sir.
say a couple of things?
Absolutely.
In regards to, if you're wondering, the condition of our aquifer right now for the city of College Place, just give you an update right now. All our wells are set, have been lowered. Our pumps have been lowered in our wells. So we don't have any risk right now of, the water being drawn down to where we can't pump it because our pumps are too high. So that part is okay. The concern, just so you know, is that if we were to lose our large well, then we would immediately have to contact the city of Walla Walla to see if we can turn that intertie on, because we would not have the supply to provide water, the amount of water that we are using now. That's why it's imperative that we get this new well going, and hopefully Department of Health will step up and get that review done so that we can go out to bid. But I just wanted to update the council in regards to that. As far as if our pumps are working, our wells are working fine, we're at a depth that we don't need to be concerned right now. So I just thought the council would be interested in knowing about that. So we're keeping an eye on the wells and monitoring them. My water quality guy has it on his cell phone, so he knows where everything's at all times. So just wanted to update you on that.
Okay, thank you. And Councilmember Peterson has a question or comment.
Oh, real quick follow-up. I made a misstatement to somebody the other day, and so Walla Walla has the ability to recharge deep aquifers, I believe, from what I understand. College Place does not, because of our lack to an access to surface water. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the options that we could explore would be purchasing surplus water from Walla Walla in the winter, and then setting up one of our wells. Now that's very expensive to set up one of our wells to take water in, and then to be able to pump it back. But there's options that we could explore and to see if it's reasonable for us to look at purchasing and recharging. You'll notice that in the paper that Walla Walla has now basically, from what I'm understanding, has used their recharge water and are now pulling from their wells. So this has been a significant drought year.
Thanks, Paul.
And the solution is not necessarily to drill another well. We have to realize having more wells with an aquifer that's declining is not going to solve the problem. We need another source that's outside of the wells. And so, we need to be proactive in looking for the future.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, you mentioned that if something happened to our, I think you said big well.
Yeah.
What well number is that, and what's its current condition?
That is well number 3. That's the one that failed last year right after the summer season. the VFD portion burned out, and we had to replace that. That was I think a 3-month wait to get the parts. So that's got new parts on it. So we're hoping we're working really diligently to keep that electronic room cool, and keeping. We've got 2 air conditioners in there, doing whatever we can to keep that area cool, because that's the problem with control rooms.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for that. I'm sure glad we have that other well too.
Yeah.
But yes, still all scary situations. Anyone else have a question or comment regarding our water systems? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Withers, and thank you, Mr. Hartwig. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so let's see, we're gonna move on to item, let's see, the draft proposed allocations of American Rescue Plans, and Mr. Rizzatello is gonna present on that.
Hey, thank you. So as you all may know, a couple of months ago, federal government announced that with the American Rescue Plan, there was supposed to be allocations going to the local governments for communities that obtained CDBG or Community Development Block Grant money. They received them directly from the federal government. So City of Walla Walla received a direct allocation. In our case, for communities that do not receive direct CDBG, it flowed through the State Office of Financial Management. So as you could probably predict, that definitely increases significant lag time in which we got the grant materials, the contract, and so forth. The disbursement of the grant funds was based on a formula where it was dependent upon if you're a full service municipality, what your population, your median income, poverty rate, a fairly complex formula. And that is where the state derives how much money you would receive. And the interesting thing is, over time, as they were drafting the contracts, the number fluctuated. So when our contract was finally issued, the number went from about 2 million up to just a little north of 2.6 million. Now the payment is not received all at once. It's received in 2 iterations. So basically divide that number by 2. So we have already received a payment of 1.3 million. The other 1.3 we will get basically next February. It can be used on a variety of things. Revenue drops due to COVID in certain areas, infrastructure, programming that essentially helps offset the effects of COVID on the community populace, and then equipment meant to respond to it, as well as bonuses for frontline folks who were in the emergency staffing model that had to respond to this. So what ended up occurring is we talked about this as management team, and department heads submitted proposals. And then Brian, myself, and Mayor, we started essentially figuring out what could be fit when and where, and then under what installment. So you will see what we came up with before you. I'll go through each. The key thing is, because we get audited strictly because it's passed through federal money, he had to come up with justification of how it was related to COVID within one of those constructs. So you'll see that under the rationale. That will help if you approve all this, so we can justify it to others. Then the installment, you'll see first installment means that we would pursue it now. Second installment means we would tie it to when we receive that second payment out in February. And then you'll see notes about whether or not the cost is one-time or reoccurring. The prioritization rate of high, medium, low, very similar to our 6-year plans, and then the benefit. Quite a bit of this will mirror things you've seen in the 6-year plans in the past, or discussion items we've had over the past years about deficiencies we've been trying to cure. So the first one is a replacement fire truck. That was due for replacement in a couple of years. So the idea, to avoid us having to do a significant bond issue, is to go get the fire truck with this money. City of Walla Walla has ordered the fire trucks with this money, so they've already done it. So pretty much every city you could think of is buying a fire truck with this to avoid a bond issue. So that's why I'm proposing we do. Now, one of the things I'm going to caveat this with, where Chief Winter has emailed them and we've put the offer out there, is for the uses within the city proper, we can get away with the typical apparatus we have without the ladder. The only building that needs a ladder is the dorms over at Walla Walla University. We have posed the question to the university and we are awaiting a response about what, if you help us, if you contribute to this, we will investigate getting a ladder truck. Reason we don't want that borne fully on the taxpayers is that the cost of a ladder truck is about double the cost of a conventional fire truck, and that needs purely being derived by the high-rise building down there. So that is a moving target discussion we're still having with university administration. But regardless, the idea is to get a fire truck. Next item is a stellar truck, and that helps essentially with snow removal and general public works operations. We had this in the budget for the equipment replacement plan. The big issue is that we ended up mothballing that for this year because the cost of the grader ended up significantly exceeding what the initial draft estimates were. So this would put that truck back into play and we would get it done. The next one is the AV system improvement for council chambers. Now, we did have a footnote in that in the budget for this year in the IT plan. It amounted to fixing the AV system and then doing some very minor stuff for about $60,000. The problem is that with the state regulations that the governor and all the folks in Olympia put on us, is that with the amount of closed captioning you have to do, the fact that the cameras have to zoom on whoever's talking, and that if you're going to do it in person, you also have to have the same opportunity and seamless back and forth to the online iteration. The complexity of this is much greater than the system that we were, to be frank, going to try to duct tape together. So the idea here is that if we're going to do this, do it right. I do not believe that it'll end up being 300,000, but at the rate the estimates have been going around because of COVID, I don't want to shortchange ourselves. So put in 300,000. The other thing we would do with this is to do draft plans for the jail cell area and the Sallyport area. It's now vacated since the police department moved their items to the Evans building. Main reason being is that once we're redoing council chambers, we want to make sure we're placing everything in the correct spot and that we don't deal with council chambers and then a year or two down the road, it's like, oh, oops, we have to tear down the wall again to go do the stuff over by the jail cells in Sallyport. So the idea is to do it correctly and move on. And we believe that this cost would encompass the cost to have someone that knows what they're doing actually design the system and then go build it out. The broadband. This is something I've talked about at length at previous meetings. I've had discussions with the county, the university, College Place School District about us all going in on quarters on a local match. This 100,000 would represent the match from the city, trying to secure that immediately because our name is in the hat for NTIA grant that essentially is being paid for with ARPA money. And that would essentially do what I mentioned about doing fiber or home citywide. We have to see if the state will get it. But I was able to get us secured where we're a partner on that. Economic Development Administration on the federal level and others, they're all getting out this broadband money pretty much in the next 2 months. So it's key that we have our local match, otherwise we'll get passed up. Other key things, gun range, just some supplies because the washroom's getting finished up in there as well as the roof. We did get a good deal where we end up getting the surplus mobile classroom. But I mean, again, those weren't in the best shape, but you get some for free. You have to put some money into it to make it appropriate. So that's what this is. We have the electricity going out there. We have pretty much most of everything else. There's this minor stuff having to go on with the washroom and then getting the roof in appropriate conditions. So that's what that is. Revenue deficiencies in community development. Now, this is just to essentially balance out the budget, and this is a placeholder, but I mean, we are seeing an uptick in some development activity, so this could go either way, but again, this is just a plan. Our key deficiency is villages of Fort Walla Walla. There still is a lot of back and forth going on. I will say, I'll just couch it this way. There is, while they still own the property, there's a minor legal issue going on with the previous landowner that sold it to them and then the new developer. I feel and they feel it's going to be resolved, but that is what's led to that apartment development taking quite a while to get done. I continue to monitor that and I'm in communications with them every couple weeks. But that element of 500,000 is just a placeholder on the community development side because covering lost revenue due to COVID or economic conditions that can be loosely connected to it, that's an allowable expense. Youth rec coordinator, I talked about that tangentially in months past. This conversation has definitely grown, and what it's entailed is that College Place Public Schools, their board, they feel that it's a priority as well, and then Sunbridge, their board also feels that it's a priority. So the general concept is to try to build a College Place specific year-round youth rec program, and that we have a couple of components to it. Component one would be to continue what we're doing with Campfire. Component two is basically one of the big issues with advertising Campfire, other youth rec programs, and things going on in the community is the lack of a part-time coordinator. Right now, pretty much I'm on Facebook, and if I happen to trip over something, I share it on the city social media pages. However, depending on whether I may or may not see something run across Facebook isn't really a good way to get the message out. So this would help with coordination. And the other concept is talking with Blue Zones, because they have a staff person that could dive in with this, where we could actually start doing competitive youth sports programming like soccer, pickleball, and basketball. Because I don't know if you've been out at Kiwanis Park lately during the summer, but there's a significant group of teens using it at nighttime where they're actually bringing in like lights you would get from Home Depot and playing out there at like 10 o'clock at night. So there's heavy use. So the concept is actually to build a rec program, and that basically the cost would be split into thirds. And then to be frank, the various groups, we would look for other partners like Walmart and then incorporate United Way and others to continue this thing. But the general thirds would be borne by the school district because to be frank, they've received way more ARPA COVID money than we did, like way more. And then us, and then Sunbridge, but would be under the auspice. Some of the staff would be under auspices of Sunbridge just because they don't have as much of the extra costs as like a government would. So you can get a lot of this programming done a lot more efficiently. So that's what the proposal is for that. Next one is fleet mechanic. Over the years, this has been mentioned by Paul, and this need has definitely grown over time. Historically, if you look at how Public Works was staffed, we always had like 2 mechanics around until, frankly, I would say the last like decade or so. And it's right now how it's been going since I've been here, and then even predating me to Pat, is that pretty much Jeff is working on vehicles. If he gets too backlogged, we're having to pull people off of the operations crew to help him, which then means operations isn't getting done. And then if everyone's backlogged, then we're having to ship out stuff, and then you're paying a premium for that. So I end up getting a little too late where I could include it in this, but I can share it with you at the next meeting. Jeff submitted a very detailed report and proposal showing the efficiency and the need for this. So I am in support of that. Next option. One of the things that was outlined in the grant agreement is that you can utilize this money to provide bonuses for emergency workers who work during COVID. Now, the federal definition of emergency worker is frontline officers, firefighters, and your operation field workers in public works. The general concept with this would be to provide bonuses to those staff members of about $3,000. So that is essentially what the proposal is at this time for that. The thing I will say where I can say with fair confidence that that's what it will be is researching further essentially union negotiations, because we were talking about an emergency and it was COVID. You can't be taking arbitration over that. So I mean, technically, you don't have to offer anything, but talking with our counterparts in other cities, they are offering such bonuses, so it is appropriate and it's allowed within that grant program. Other items, sidewalk differential. You approved this a couple of meetings ago. What that was is, and you can see it when you drive on Baden, Davis, and 12th, we're building the sidewalks. And basically, because every other government agency is letting contracts at the same time, the cost of construction, the lack of contractors, it's a nightmare where it's inflating costs across the board. So that differential is to cover the gap we had in the bid we received. So that way we can do all of the sidewalks that were outlined in that grant proposal that got funded by the state 2 years ago. Next one is Sky Avenue. Sky Avenue should sound familiar because that was in the capital facility grant, the program you all approved as part of the budget last year. The big issue is that as the engineering was done on it, you're dealing with a situation where right now you have an older water line. It's going in the alley and being connected to the back of houses, really hard to get to, and you're trying to move all of that to the front so the staff could actually get to it. When the final engineering was done on this and bids were entertained, because of the complexity and the heavy bid environment with everyone doing projects, for what we had budgeted for Sky Avenue, the estimates were coming in about $300,000 over what we budgeted for that. That is a key project that needs to happen because of the placement of the water line, because we have a situation there, those alleys over there are really narrow, and if we keep it where it's at, that's going to cost well over that depending on the kind of break we have. So the what that is in here for is to do that project because it needs to happen. Utility assistance. The idea here is to continue what we were doing with the earlier CARES COVID funds, where folks get into trouble not of their own accord, just that they lost their job, other COVID considerations, and they've had good track record historically with us. This would essentially help with that need to cover the utilities. Road infrastructure fixes. Paul and our new public works director, Robert, they're helping me identify essentially the general cost of key elements that have been graded in our iWork program where the roadways falling apart. So at this time, I included a map of roads that were identified when I drove and ranked the roads as far as ones that need to be fixed. But we're going to get defined costs, so when we let that out, we can cover the largest amount of road we possibly can. But that's why right now we have that listed as unspecified. Idea there is to go throw 143,000 to be getting the roads up to snuff, the local roads. And then the final thing, and we, Brian and I alluded to this when we made the city attorney a full-time position, and then just also the increased cost because we have a whole backlog of cases because court wasn't happening when we were in the midst of COVID, and now we have a very big backlog, is essentially covering the legal. And this would be split over a 2-year period, about 130,000. So as you can see, the general proposal that ends up equating out to what we end up receiving is our ARPA allocation. Now there are other elements of ARPA that we're getting through other sources, like for instance, federal highway bill passed as part of everything, and we're actually going to get a construction grant allocation from the federal government, just shy of $3 million to go rebuild Majanier. So there's money coming from other places, but at least for the general aid element of the grant, that's what you see before you. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
All right. So, whew, you've got our minds spinning, Mike. All right. Councilmember Peterson, you get to be the first. Any questions or comments?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Selby.
Well, first, I'd just like to comment how impressed I am that you remember and juggle all these priorities and find ways to piece together this funding. This is just another demonstration of that. And, you know, that is really your superpower. So thank you, Mike. And then just to be completely clear, this includes both 1 and 2.
Yeah, this is 1 and 2. So this would be first installment and second installment. This is a plan for the whole allocation that's coming in the city. Now, in city coffers right now, we only have the 1.3 million as part of the first installment.
Okay.
The reason I'm asking for both installments is because, to be perfectly candid with you all, because every city pretty much in the general area is ordering fire trucks right now, even though it's in the second allocation, we can put in our order ahead of time. And from what I was hearing from Chief Winter, even if we put our ordering now, we probably wouldn't get a new one delivered for about 1.5 years. So that's why I think it would be a wise thing to get on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was surprised when I actually went and looked at furniture, what the delays were like. And follow up to that is there a timeline or a deadline by when we have to have this money spent?
Yeah, so technically you can spend this money within about 3 years. The date's like out in 2024, but that's to essentially have the last half of it spent. They want you to see the first half spent about mid-2022.
Okay. I was just thinking some of our smaller transportation projects might actually benefit from a little bit of a delay to hopefully get some of everybody's building at once and we don't have our supply chain in place. So things like putting in the lights, you know, maybe we could do that for less if we like did it a 1.5 years from now or 2 years rather than right now.
Well, yeah, that's why, for instance, like with the Sky Avenue thing, even though we have final engineering done, the bid documents, everything all ready to go, that's why I have that in the second installment, because I believe we could probably get that done for underneath that amount if we wait on it, but I still think it's important we get it done, because that's been a problem since like I've been here. So we should probably get on that. But like, for instance, another thing, like the AV system for council chambers, I mean, a big reason why we're still in this online format is because Walla Walla, even though at the time they were getting ripped on by the some of the residents about it, they invested in that bigger like AV system. So that's why they were able to go back in person, because they put a significant amount of money in there about 2 years ago with us. Because we basically have that older AV system, like from the time of cable. That's why we're in the current situation. So like that one, we can't wait on, because to get the schematics done, plus get it bid out and get the stuff delivered in and of itself is a timely endeavor.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you're putting thought into that, because you're right. Some of these things we need to move on. And so I'm only saying, let's wait where we don't have to move right away. So thank you.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Sherman.
Thanks, Mike. This is very insightful. Can you say just a couple more words on how the emergency worker bonuses are being assigned? Who picks out who the recipients are? Is it just like this says officers? Does that include like sergeants, or like in the fire department, captains and other titles, or just?
It would be the just frontline officers. So
Aren't they all?
Well, that's, it depends whose definition you're going along with, the federal government, and the fact that unfortunately our allocation came through the state. So they actually, much like everything else the state of Washington touches, they added more language to it. So their definition of the emergency worker was basically frontline police officers, so non-management essentially, for the police, the fire, and the public works. So therein is the issue, because per that grant agreement, it ends up where it's purely the officers, firefighters, and operations people. So sergeants, management, none of that qualifies. In fact, there's articles in the state of Washington, cities already trying to get around that, and then the auditor having a field day with them. So I'm trying to avoid that element. So yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a long discussion, actually, to come to that conclusion earlier. Thank you, Mike. Councilmember Boyle.
No questions. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments before we go for, I forgot where I'm at. Before we call for a motion. Okay, Councilmember Peterson, thank you. Oops, you're on mute. You're still on mute, Councilmember Peterson.
And I'm still on mute. You know, if this happens one more time.
I'm glad it's.
Could you read my lips though?
It's getting late, right?
Motion to adopt resolution 21-036, which allocates American Rescue Plan grant dollars for the city.
All right, thank you. Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Great. Any additional discussions? All right, let's vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is passed. Great. Thank you, Mike. Now we're going to move on to the TIB Complete Street Grant Resolution for Northeast Rose Street lighting. And Mike, I hope you got enough rest between. It's because you're up again.
Yeah. So with this grant application, we qualify for complete street dollars because we adopted a complete street ordinance about 4 years ago. So the project will be forthcoming, the 4 Bikes project, which will continue the cycle track and put in pedestrian lighting that will bid out in a month or two, because we're trying to allow the bidding environment to sort itself out. That's funded by a Complete Street grant. So once again, these get awarded every other year. Only cities that have these ordinances can apply for this, and you can't just apply. You actually have to have a sponsoring agency or partner turn in on your behalf. A lot of people essentially use Department of Transportation, the MPO, or Department of Commerce to essentially nominate their projects, but each agency only has like 2 nominations. So those agencies get inundated, and it's very minimal the cities that go to them, they actually get nominated. How we get nominated is that because we're a certified local government, we actually go to the Department of Archaeology and get them to nominate our projects. And most people don't know you can do that, but that's what we do, and then we get nominated. So the general concept here is to go get another Complete Street grant. And the idea of what we would do is to put in the pedestrian lights on the south side of Rose Street from where it terminates right now at Ash all the way at Cary Court. I don't know if any of you have been out there late at night. I have riding my bike, and it's pitch black out there. The other issue is that when you get over to Damson, there is a bus stop over there. And while there is a pad for a bus stop on the south side, there's basically railroad gravel on the north side. And as part of this grant, we can also incorporate potentially giving essentially a rapid flashing beacon or something at Damson and Rose. So that is what this concept is, to turn in a Complete Street grant to go put the ped lights in, and then a safe crossing at Damson and Rose.
All right, thank you. Start with you, Councilmember Peterson.
No questions, thanks.
Councilwoman Sherman. Sorry, I'll get back to you, Councilmember Selby. All right, Councilmember Selby.
No questions.
Councilmember Sherman.
Like, I'm not ready. Wait. No questions.
All right, and Councilmember Boyle.
No questions.
All right. Okay, so do we have a motion on this?
I'll move to adopt resolution number 21-037, which is a resolution of support for Transportation Improvement Board, Complete Street Grant Application for Northeast Rose Street, Complete Street Improvements.
Councilmember Selby, second.
Oh. All right, thank you. Are there any additional discussions? All right, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. The motion is passed. All right, Mike, now you're going to discuss the TIB Urban Arterial Grant Program for Southeast 12th Street between College to Larch.
Okay, this one is basically redoing what we tried to apply for last year. So in this iteration, we're trying to get Transportation Improvement Board funds for Southeast 12th Street to basically reconstruct it from College Avenue to Larch. Would entail new sidewalks, bike lanes, continued parking on one side, and then also to put in some pedestrian street lighting, although at a greater distance than what's on College Avenue, but still put in lighting because it's a heavy utilized multimodal corridor. What at least I found since I've been here with the Urban Arterial Program is basically TIB turns you down the first time, tells you what's wrong with the grant, you're going to figure out how to come up with a little bit bigger of a local match, and then you turn in the second time, and then you end up getting it. So the first time we got denied per is the historical trend. So this would be the second time. So I'm hoping we would get it this go around.
Great. Councilmember Peterson, any questions or comments?
So Mike, is this is once again, I remember this this process before. no engineering on this. Would that be included in this fee, the design component?
Yeah, so the design component is included
Yeah.
within grant request because we do not have engineering for Southeast 12. No.
Okay, I remember now. Thank you, Mike.
Councilmember Selby,
No questions.
Councilmember Sherman,
No questions, thanks.
Councilmember Boyle.
No questions, thanks.
All right, so then do we have a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 21-038, which is a resolution of support for Transportation Improvement Board Urban Arterial Program Grant application for Southeast 12th Street reconstruction, College to Larch.
Councilmember Boyle, all seconds.
Okay, great. Any additional discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. The motion is passed. Thank you, Mike. All right, so let's take a look here. We've got, hold on, I've lost my place. So Mr. Rickard, correct? You're going to do the next presentation on
Yes,
the Doan storm drainage easement.
yes, this is probably the easiest decision you're gonna make tonight and the
And you had-
quickest.
And you had to wait all to be last.
So the Doan's Pond, the pond out at the Homestead Development, the stormwater facility out there off of Doan's Ave is nearing completion. They're gonna begin landscaping it here shortly. But the way it's constructed, basically, the underground infrastructure is built right up to the property line on the east side of the pond, the storm structure. And in the event 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, if we need to get in there and do actual underground work to repair the facility or do maintenance, we will need a construction, we will need an easement area to do that construction. So Hayden Homes owns the property to the east, and they have agreed to grant us a easement for maintenance and construction purposes. And so what we're asking is you to authorize the mayor to accept that easement on behalf of the city.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah, I'd like to have a 20-minute discussion about this, but no questions at this time.
Councilmember Selby.
No questions.
Councilmember Sherman.
I don't have any questions, but John, thanks for hanging out with us tonight.
I'm gonna have a word with whoever's arranged this. agenda.
We should have kept the RH2 guy until the end. Just
Actually, I'm gonna have my wife talk to whoever made this.
I saw you on there, and so I had to look past to see, it's like, is he ever going to present here? You were last. Sorry. All right. And Councilmember Boyle.
No questions.
All right. So if there's no further discussion, do we have a motion? Oh, don't make.
Councilmember
Councilmember
Peterson.
Selby,
Go ahead.
I move that we authorize Mayor Hernandez to sign the storm drainage easement.
Second, Councilmember Peterson.
All right. Any additional discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any
Thank you.
opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Thank you, John. Bless
Thank
your
you.
heart for hanging in there. All right, so next item is canceling the August workshop. We had discussion, I believe, at our last workshop, whether or not we needed an August workshop. There was various reasons that came up for canceling, including that we had to, when we were doing the appointment of Councilmember Boyle, we had 4 weeks, so we had to actually have meetings, and then there's other events going on, including the elections at our next August workshop. So I'm going to go through council members for any questions or comments or oppositions regarding canceling our August workshop. And I'll start with you, Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah. No questions. No, that's fine. I support that. Yeah, to cancel it. Real quick question, perhaps at the end we could discuss it. In-person meetings, I just want to know an update on that one.
Okay, we'll go back to it. Councilmember Selby.
I support this.
Okay, Councilmember Sherman.
I also support this.
All right, Councilmember Boyle.
I am on board.
All right, anybody want to drag this on and have a more further discussion? All right, I have a motion to cancel the August workshop.
I move to cancel the August workshop.
Thank you. Second.
Councilmember Selby, second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it, the motion is passed. Okay, we have one administrative report regarding the salary ordinance update. Oh, poor Sean, she's even worse further than John.
Oh, you poor
Yeah.
thing, Sean.
I got the same amount of sympathy as John got.
I thought you were just hanging in there for the pleasant conversations.
I was. That was it.
I think that's why Brian's
We
here.
enjoy hanging out with you, but we do feel sorry for you.
Clearly, I didn't look far enough to the agenda to see. Sorry, Sean.
Well, I'll be quick as well. We just need to make one little tweak to the salary ordinance involving our fire chief in section 12 when he goes out on the section 12 right now speaks specifically to fire, fighting fires or wildfires, and he's been deployed on other things like COVID. And so we've had a little bit of trouble with the reimbursements because our policy doesn't exactly speak to that. So we want to change the wording to Washington State Incident Management Team. And so it will cover all the things that he does as opposed to just fire or wildfire. And then also changing his rate of pay from straight time to time and a half when he is deployed at those incident management situations, and that is a benefit to the fire department. He goes out on those that pays his wages for us while and benefits while he is there. They reimburse us for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted you to be aware that you would see that on the next council meeting as an action item, or maybe a consent agenda item since we've actually discussed it. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, just in case there's any questions or comments, we'll go through the council members and we'll start with Mr. Peterson.
Well, that sounds very reasonable. Thank you.
Ms. Selby?
I just have one question about, does time and a half apply when he's at this, when he normally would be working?
No, not during the day. This is only out, not during his regular work hours. It's when he goes, when he's out beyond that. And that's only while he's deployed at one of these reimbursable incidents. If he, for some reason, works for he is an exempt employee. So if he works over 40 hours at the fires, doing his regular duties in his job description, then we don't pay him time and a half overtime. But it's when he's working as in the Washington State Incident Management Team.
Thank you. I just wanted to be sure that was clear.
Thank you.
Ms. Sherman?
No questions.
Ms. Boyle?
No questions.
All right. Now, bless your heart, Sean. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, there's several informational reports in this packet for you to review at your convenience, including the police report, the water, and the community development. And we do not have an executive session tonight, so we're going to go to Councilmember Peterson's question regarding in-person meetings. And Mike, well, I know the answer. I'll let you address that because I'm sure you have better details.
Well, I mean, basically, until if the governor releases additional rules and guidance that essentially lower the thresholds as it stands right now, because you have to both accept input from the online Zoom and then have the captioning, the zoom in of people testifying in person and everything else. As it stands right now, unless there's a change on the state level, we really need to get the council chambers essentially retooled with the whole AV system. I mean, as it stands right now, that's essentially why we've been in this deadlocked position. Lisa, I don't know if you would have anything more to add to that.
No, not really. We were temporarily exploring some ideas that we had that might work if we were able to be unmasked in close quarters in the council chambers. It's not necessarily looking like we're going to be able to be all unmasked in close quarters in the council chambers here real soon. So the real fix is to get the renovations done on our AV system, and that will solve any of the issues that we're having with being able to have what essentially is a hybrid meeting where we have participants can be either in person or remote. Because as soon as we have any in-person element, that is the optional part of the current law. The current statutes are requiring us to have the remote element. So we have to, no matter how we decide to meet, the remote element and remote participation for either council members, staff, or the public is a requirement.
Councilmember Peterson, so Mike, we're going to get this thing geared up just in time for COVID to be over. We won't need it, but the idea is probably going forward that we would maybe have hybrid meetings forever.
Well, to be frank, yes. I mean, I think we're in an era now where because the meetings are held in Zoom and through Facebook and everything else, I think we're to a point now where the public is expecting that to not only be in person or but then to take testimony through the online means. So yeah, I think we're at the new frontier where regardless this is no longer an option, it's more of an expectation. And unfortunately, the current council chambers is circa 1992. So that's the current problem we're in.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
I have a question. If we're meeting on Zoom right now, how are we bypassing a closed captioning requirement, or does that exist and we just don't know about it?
It's basically per the regulations I was reading, there's language in there that deals with it when you're having hybrid meetings. The stuff I was reading on was fairly moot when you were just meeting on Zoom. There's also other stuff that's pretty confusing when you're trying to do hybrid meetings with an in-person element and then an online element. So that's the situation. If we meet through Zoom like we do now, it's been like status quo. As soon as you get the in-person element, that's when you have to pay attention to all this other stuff. So that's why we're in the current situation we're in.
Ms. Selby?
Speaking as a faculty member, I will tell you that hybrid is way harder than completely online or completely in person. You get all the worst elements of both. So, but if it's going to take significant amounts of time to redo the council chambers, might we be able to like borrow some facilities at least occasionally? I'm thinking of like Walla Walla University, the community college. They've all had to put together classrooms that work for hybrid, and many of those are probably sitting empty during the time that we meet. I wouldn't want us to put money into it, so only if they donate it, but just a thought. Although I kind of like the online, to be perfectly honest.
All right. Any other questions or comments for good of the order? All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move. Councilmember Shelby.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Councilmember Boyle.
Okay, great. So if there is no objection, the meeting is adjourned at 9:04. All right, have a good night, everyone.